Welcome everyone. Today we are going to do some fun recipes here on the farm with some spices, and we're going to throw some dandelions into one of the recipes. So I hope you'll stick around. If you're new here, welcome. And if you're a returning viewer, thank you so much for tuning in today. I am Bonita. I'm from rural Kansas, and I was raised by Depression-era parents who raised me very much the same that they were raised. It's so funny because I spent the afternoon with my last living aunt, who is almost 84 years old this week. And we were comparing stories of growing up, and her stories were very similar to some of my stories. However, I was born in the 60s and she was born in 1940 because my parents still lived the same way that they were brought up, and they were born in 1929 and 1931. I grew up sharing bath water. I was the first one in, then my mom, then my dad. We used the same water. My aunt said she also shared bath water because they had to heat it and carry it in, so it was burdensome. Well, it wasn't burdensome for my parents, but they just believed in conserving and saving as much as possible. So I still was raised with some of those weird older traditions, like there wasn't indoor plumbing. But it was a fun afternoon to spend with her. I will be sharing some of her memories with you as we go forward. But today we're going to do some homemade spices. I am going to do a garlic pepper spice, a garlic pepper sweet rub, and a knockoff seasoned salt spice that we can make and keep in our pantry. Now, spices are so expensive these days, so I've started making a lot of these at home, and I'm using those old recycled jars that I have from other products to store them in. I'm just labeling those, and it's working beautifully. But first, I'm going to share with you a crock pot pork chop recipe with dandelions. I hope you enjoy. Today I'm using up what I have with a little bit of a twist. I have about 4 large potatoes cubed. I'm going to use about 2 tablespoons of butter. I'm using the plant butter because that's what I have on hand. I'm going to use about 2 tablespoons of Hidden Valley Ranch because I have some of that. I've also given the recipe for how to make it from scratch in other videos. I'm going to use salt and pepper, apple cider vinegar. I have 4 seared pork chops, and then I'm going to use the ingredients here to make a mixture of 2 tablespoons of ranch seasoning plus 1 tablespoon of apple cider vinegar. We're going to be putting that on our pork chops and potatoes in the crock pot, and then we're going to top it off with some dandelions. I've added my pork chops, my potatoes. Now we're going to add our sauce, and then we're going to toss this really well and make sure everything is coated. And then I've added about 1/2 cup of water so we can get all of the goodness out of the bowl. I'm going to top it with the 2 tablespoons of butter. Added that water in there to make sure we got all the flavoring. Added 2 tablespoons of butter, and now we're going to cook this on low for 5 to 6 hours. And here is the delicious result. And those little tiny green things that you see down here in the potatoes, those are your cooked dandelions. I hope you enjoy. Now, when I grew up, we didn't have many spices in the home. We had salt and we had pepper. I don't remember us even having paprika that you would put on deviled eggs. Our deviled eggs were just deviled eggs with nothing sprinkled on top for pretty. So we had the very basics. No garlic powder, no onion salt, nothing like that. But today we're going to do some homemade spices that we can store and use, because today spices are a big thing. Everybody uses spices in their foods. They're considered a staple now, and they can be very expensive. And some of them are so easy to make. A lot of us have a plethora of spices in our pantry, but yet we buy the mixed spices because we're not always sure what goes in them. Well, I'm going to share some recipes with you today so you can take the things you already have in your pantry and we can make these spices so we don't have to buy the next jar of those mixed spices. So let's get started. So what you'll need to start off with is just get some reusable jars and label them. You don't need to buy anything fancy, no special containers, no special labels. I just get reusable jars. I think this had some salsa in it. And then I just take some old envelopes, I make the label, I tape it on, and this works perfectly. This is an old jelly jar. This works perfectly. And then when you need to wash the jar, you don't have to worry about messing up the label or anything. You can just make a new one for next to nothing. And this is an old pickle relish jar. So we're going to start today with just some simple spices. And I'm starting with ones that I need in the pantry. So we're going to start with some seasoned salt. So for seasoned salt, we're going to need salt, paprika, garlic powder, and onion powder. That's all that goes into this knockoff version of Lawry's seasoned salt. So we're going to mix that up. And you can double and triple this recipe as you need to make as much in your jar as you want to keep on hand. I like to buy my spices where they cost the least. So just because I maybe have like a Member's Mark large container of garlic powder, that doesn't mean anything. Don't pay any attention to that. My husband bought this while I was in Texas. So you do your research and find where you can get your spices for the cheapest. But that's what we're going to use today. I'm going to use stuff I already have on hand. So to start off, for the seasoned salt, you're going to have 5 tablespoons of salt. And yeah, that sounds like a lot of salt, but this is the recipe, and you're not going to be completely drowning your food in this, so it still will be the same as like buying it in the store and using it. It's just when we make these from scratch, we realize how much salt is really in some of these things, don't we? So I've got my 5 tablespoons of salt. I need 1 tablespoon of paprika. So you can tell by the measurements, this is going to make quite a bit in your jar. So 1 tablespoon of paprika, 2 teaspoons of garlic powder, and 2 teaspoons of onion powder. Look how easy this is. Lawry's seasoned salt, last I checked, it was like over $3 a jar. I mean, that's really expensive. And a lot of people swear by sticking to the name brand. So that's why I like to make this stuff from scratch and find some knockoff versions. And then we're just going to mix this up really well. And you have your seasoned salt ready to go. And look, it made quite a bit in the jar. And, so you could put it in a shake container if you wanted to make it easier. But I just keep mine in jars, and then I just use my measuring spoons to get them out. So now we're going to do a sweet garlic powder. So I got a little bit larger jar for that because it has a few more ingredients. We're going to use a half of a teaspoon of onion powder. A fourth of a teaspoon of paprika. A fourth of a teaspoon of parsley. 2 teaspoons of black pepper. Two teaspoons of garlic powder. A half of a teaspoon of cumin. A half of a teaspoon of salt. And 1 teaspoon of brown sugar. And that's why it is a sweet garlic pepper. Now you can use this as a rub on fish or chicken, and you can also just use it as a seasoning if you want to. Now, like I said, double and triple these as you want to, but that's just one tiny mixture of it. It didn't make very much, so probably when I turn off this video, I'm going to make a bunch more. But I just wanted to give you like the basic recipes. So yeah, then you have your sweet garlic pepper ready to go. Now, the last one we're going to do is garlic pepper. You can just do equal parts of garlic powder and black pepper if you want to. This recipe actually has some parsley in it as well, because if you look in the garlic pepper that you buy that's pre-mixed, it has other ingredients. But this is a very simple mixture that will work great. So this is the recipe for that one. I have my jars pre-labeled so that I don't get my stuff mixed up, you know, when I'm looking at it later going, which one was this? This one is a tablespoon of parsley, 8 teaspoons of garlic powder. And of course, you can do these differently because, you know, 3 teaspoons makes a tablespoon, so you could do it differently if you wanted. All right, there's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, and then 4.5 teaspoons of pepper. And I like this recipe because I am not huge on pepper, and you know, I like pepper, but I don't like a ton of it, so that's why I don't want to do the equal parts of pepper and garlic powder for our home anyway. So 4.5 teaspoons, and then I'm just going to put the lid on this, mix it up, and there is our garlic pepper. A lot of people wonder how people lived so cheaply in the Depression era. This is the way they did it. They made so many things at home. Now, they did not have all of these spices and things that they used, so that drastically cut from their budget. But even my grandfather would take eggs to the store and trade them for the groceries that they needed. They had their own dairy cows, so they had their own milk, their own ice cream. They would keep the cream separator in the cellar, and then when the cream got thick enough to churn, they would make butter. When the milk went soured, they would bake with it, and they would cook the soured milk to make cottage cheese. Some of these things like cottage cheese weren't even being sold in stores at that time. So this is how they made every bit of that milk stretch to feed their families. I always wondered why my mom loved cottage cheese so much. I always hated cottage cheese, but she loved it. And then when I learned a lot about her upbringing from my aunt, I learned this is why. Cottage cheese was a staple in their home because that was one of the ways that they used up the soured milk. So as I grew up, I always thought my parents were poor. But if you look at the criteria for what someone who is well off today is, they met that criteria. They always had savings. They never owed money to anyone. They paid cash for everything. And we went on vacations. They were very frugal. Everything we did was frugal, but we had it all by being frugal. And so I learned so much from them, and it has enriched my life so that I've been able to travel, so that I've been able to retire early. I have written 2 Depression era cookbooks with my family's favorites that I also raised my kids on these, and they love these recipes. The links are in the description box if you would like to help out this channel. I hope you've enjoyed this video today, sharing some recipes with you, and I hope to see you in the next video. Thanks for watching today.